Welcome to Badass Women at Any Age. This is your host, Bonnie Marcus. Each week, I introduce you to amazing women who are challenging the status quo, changing the rules of the game, and proving anything is possible if you dare to live out loud. My guest today, Dr. Laura Lewandowski, describes herself as some punk from Worcester, Mass., but she's now a physician scientist leading a team investigating genetics of autoimmune diseases in global populations. Laura Lewandowski is a physician scientist who studies lupus in different pediatric populations around the world. Her global health work has brought her to Ecuador, Liberia, Haiti, and South Africa, both for clinical care and research. She established a registry of pediatric lupus patients that continues to grow and is now the largest cohort in sub-Saharan Africa. She was awarded a Fogarty Global Health Fellowship and a Lupus Foundation Early Career Award for her work with pediatric lupus patients in South Africa. Laura's held several leadership positions in rheumatology and global health. She's published many articles on lupus in Africa and the challenges to rheumatology, clinical care, education, and practice in less resourced countries. She's a passionate advocate for the advancement of women in medicine and science. Laura, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me on the show. I'm just so incredibly honored to be here. Yeah, it's been a wild ride and I'm still on it.
I want to hear all about that wild ride. But let me say, it's certainly an honor for me to have you on the show. And I can't wait to hear your story and to have my audience also learn about your personal journey. You describe yourself as like a punk kid who grew up in Worcester, Mass., correct?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah, so you were a badass kid.
I mean, just some punk from Worcester is, the way that I see myself in that, I'm just like this regular person from a blue collar town. And, I've just had these life experiences that I've never imagined. And, I feel incredibly lucky to have the career that I have. I have a career where I find incredible meaning in the work that I do. That comes from my dedication to my patients. But in addition to, really striving to improve the lives of lupus patients, I've also just really never, injustice has never really sat well with me. And so if something is not fair, I need to do something about it. And, that's kind of translated into fighting for gender equity and global health disparities for me. And so I think that comes from my early experiences. I come from a family of all girls.
Interesting.
And yeah. So there's 4 of us and, that invited or not invited, but that a lot of people just made comments from a very early time of like, oh, 4 girls, you're poor parents, you're a poor father.
Were they all high achievers like yourself?
Yeah, I mean, my sisters are like amazing, fabulous, caring, wonderful women. My older sister is such a boss, they
Mm-hmm.
and to be honest, part of it was just like the feeling I had that that comment is just like at its heart, like, oh, what a shame you were born as you are and not born as something better, which is a boy, and then beyond that, it had nothing, I guess the perpetuation of stereotypes is just this, but nothing to do with the people that we were. We were like super outdoorsy and really athletic. So like anything my dad wanted to do, hunting, fishing, hiking, we played every sport under the sun between the 4 of us. There was like nothing that was lacking from like the traditional sun sphere that we were not doing. And so it just like really bothered me that that didn't matter. It just had to be like immediately your poor father. So like we did all those things and we took like great care of him, but oh, what a burden. Poor guy.
I think with 4 kids, maybe it's somewhere along the line he was hoping for a boy and then gave up.
I don't think so. And
Ah, okay.
my parents like never let that comment slide either. They would always counter it with like, we're really proud of our kids. We feel thankful for the girls that we have, So my parents never sent that message. Like my dad was hoping for a boy at any point. It was just like they had the family that they wanted and we were girls.
Well, it
So
sounds like you had a wonderful childhood and upbringing where uh, gender stereotypes didn't even seem to enter the equation.
yeah, I mean, in some ways, yes, in some ways, no. I went
Okay.
to Catholic school, so there was like a
You were a
lot of
good
that
girl.
there. Well, the best thing you can be as a girl in a Catholic school is like small and quiet and neat and
Mm.
like um polite. And I was probably none of those things. Like I'm very tall. I'm 6 feet tall now. I've been tall my whole life. And, I was like very social and outgoing. And, I just like was constantly causing a ruckus. And, I was none of the things that the nuns expected me to be. But I also got really good grades. So they didn't quite know what to do with me. Like they couldn't
Mm.
really punish me every day, but they also didn't, I caused a little bit more trouble than would want from like a girl.
You were a
Uh,
handful, in other words.
yeah, it was a handful for
Yeah.
sure, for sure. And and along the lines of like gender stereotypes, like I would just like speak up, like if somebody needed to carry a box to the next floor and they wouldn't let me do it, I'd be like, I'm the tallest, strongest kid in this class, like why does that
Wow.
little wimp get to skip out on class when I have to sit here and I don't even have any work left to do? It's not fair. And they would just be like, go say some prayers back at your desk.
So what? So you really owned it. I mean, you owned who you were at a very early age, and I have to say that's not usual.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways I did, in some ways I didn't. And it's kind of funny, like there was always this sense of like, I don't know, of 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 me wanting to be in spaces based on my capabilities and not based on my gender. I also grew up, even though I was from a family of 4 girls, I grew up with these like older boy cousins that I was really extremely close to. And they were like 7 or 8 years older than me. So um, they I idolized them and I wanted to do everything that they were doing. And so that was usually sports, but you can
Hmm.
imagine that like a group of 15-year-old guys was not always like super excited to have 7 and 8-year-old girls like trying to get into all their games. And it helped that I had my older sister with me, but I also just like I don't know where it came from, but I certainly didn't read this quote as a 7-year-old girl, but I certainly like had this attitude, whereas like if there's not a seat for you at the table, bring a folding chair. Like I was like, yeah, I'm gonna like play in your wiffle ball game, right guys, right,
Hmm.
right, right. And they they weren't super pumped about it, but I just kind of hung out until there was they like gave me a turn, so we would play wiffle ball or basketball and I would get just like I'd have to like chase the ball into all the neighbors' yards and down some random alley and for 2 hours, and then I'd get my at bat. And
But you
so
weren't afraid to
like it
compete,
wasn't like
right?
no, and I loved it and I still do to this day. I love competition, but I think those lessons kind of helped shape me in the environments I am today because I didn't I got a thick skin early on. Like I remember like complaining about it, and my older sister being like, like they have no time for our complaints. We just have to like stick it out. Like if we complain, they're just going to tell us to go do something else, and we don't want to.
Hmm.
And I also really got familiar with um I guess being the only girl in an all male sphere, like it's uncomfortable, but like if you're used to that, if you do it a lot, it like becomes more normal. And so I think like that in the sports realm, I was kind of doing it early on. And so as a physician and a scientist now, when that happens, I've been there before.
So you were brought up most likely to pursue any of your dreams, any of
Hmm.
your career
Hmm.
goals without any kind
Hmm.
of gender stereotypes holding you back.
For sure. For sure.
When did you decide to become a physician? How did
Pretty early on, there's nobody in my family was a physician, but my mom worked in a hospital, doing medical coding. And I remember going to work with her and just like looking around at the doctors and, thinking like that would be like something really cool. And I remember my mom being like, well, you have to go to school for a really long time to do that. And I was like, perfect. I love school. Huge nerd. That sounds great. Sign me up. And, I think even from a pretty early stage, like before college, I also knew I wanted to do global health, as well.
What do you think influenced that?
I think it's that same thing where like I don't like injustice. And so I knew that there were differences for what was available for people's health based on where they live. Like the biggest thing that determines how healthy your life will be is probably where you're born.
Yeah.
And people have different access to medications and doctors and therapies, and it just is really unfair. And so if that is true, then I want to be doing something about it. Um, and so as my first experience was in medical school, and then my deepest experience early on was probably when I was doing my training to become a pediatrician. So I started to, as part of my training program, spend a month every year in Western Africa in Liberia. And that was just like amazingly eye-opening. Like I already knew things weren't fair. That's like why I was doing it. But
Hmm.
that country at the time was shortly after the Civil War, and they just had been decimated. There were so few doctors and so few medicines and so few resources. And so, all of a sudden I was here in this country with like the sickest patients I had ever taken care of. I mean, it's in the malaria belt, and the kids there get really severe malaria. They have seizures, their kidneys shut down. They, have all sorts of breathing problems and all of the things that I'm used to, like the medications and sedation and
Not
um,
available.
yeah, like breathing machines, like all of those things weren't there. And so I had to take care of the sickest patients with the least amount of things I've ever had in my life. And, that was part of what's difficult about global health, but the challenge is kind of also something that I thrive on. And so, having to do more with less, like really spoke to me. And I really just kind of got hooked on it. And I never went into any place that I've ever worked in the global health sphere as like, the superhero with a cape, like I'm here as the doctor to save the day. Like there's always been amazing, brilliant, wonderful doctors in any setting that I've gone into, but they just don't have the resources, or they haven't had certain training, or they don't have time. Like sometimes
Yeah.
what I bring as a partner and a collaborator is that I'm not just there overwhelmed by super sick patients every day. I have the time to step back from the system and say like, this is something that we could do to make it easier to treat the next sick patient that comes along, kind of a little bit out of the fray, so to speak.
Did you ever feel marginalized at all through med school or your training because you were a woman?
Oh, for sure. For sure. I mean, you know, medicine and science, there's just like a long history of male leadership and certain, like I remember on certain rotations, people just saying like, well, you can't go into such and such or this or that because you're just going to have a baby in a year, or, they
Oh,
would like
yeah.
make and in global health too, like I was remember being in Liberia once, and I didn't have kids at that time, but there was a person, another ER doctor there with me, and he had two kids and his wife was home taking care of their kids, and they were like 4 and 2, and I didn't have kids. And somebody was saying like, well, you're not going to be able to do this for much longer because you're going to be having kids and you're going to need to be taking care of them. So this will probably be your last trip. But I was like, look at that guy over there. He's got two. Why are you having this conversation with me who does not yet have children? And he's over there just like sitting on the couch and you're not saying boo to him. It's just like
Right.
this
And can
thought.
we please talk about changing the system so that it doesn't compromise women who want careers and families?
Right. And just, taking you out of the running for certain roles or
Hmm.
or or opportunities because of what you're assuming my choices are going to be, or how I'm going to feel, or how I choose to balance those
How you
things.
choose to balance it, right? Um,
Yeah.
yeah, when I was writing my first book, The Politics of Promotion, I remember interviewing this young woman who was at one of the top consulting firms. She was out on maternity leave and she came back, and she didn't have the same clients, and she was kind of sitting in her office just wondering what was going on. And when she went to HR, they said, well, we assumed you had a baby and you didn't want to travel and you didn't want to work all that hard. She said, but I put everything in place. I'm ready to come back.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's those kinds of assumptions. But it sounds like from the very beginning, Laura, you were a competitor and up for the challenge. I can see how you fit so well into global health, where there are so many challenges that it really kind of sparks your energy and passion and enthusiasm to be able
It
to provide the best that you can there.
It does. And I think the things that you learn in global health, like they are very helpful to me as I try to find my way, advancing in leadership positions as a woman. Because as a woman, no one like lays out your clothes for you on the bed and says like, this is how you become a leader. This is the exact path. You just have to say like, I don't have what I need. So what do I have? And how can I put this together and make it work to get where I need to go? So that kind of like resourcefulness, that is very helpful as I walk the path that I'm walking now. Um, I am competitive, and I think the thing that I trust most about myself is my work ethic. Like I know that I can put the work in on a project, and that comes back to like the some punk from Worcester. Like my whole family is just like, we're workers. Like I can remember um, when I started my pediatrics residency, I did my first week of work, and I worked 80 hours that first week. And I remember like getting through it and just being like, oh my gosh, that was like crazy. And called my grandfather and said like, yeah, man, I just had the craziest week. And, I worked 80 hours this past week, Judge. And he was like, oh yeah. And he was like, maybe in his early 70s at the time. He's like, yeah, I think I just worked like 71 or 72. And I was just like,
In other words, you've got a long haul ahead of you.
yeah, and just like, like the implicit message is like,
Mm-hmm.
this is who we are. Like, you can do this. This is who we are. You got it and you keep going. And, like, that is true. Like I come from a long line of hardworking people and I can put the work in on stuff. And so, I may not be the smartest or the fastest, but I can work the hardest on something for sure.
Right. And resourceful.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Um, what what really have you learned about yourself uh, doing this work in Africa, the global health work?
Oh my gosh, so much. I think I've learned, in addition to trusting my work ethic, really trusting my intuition. Because, from the time that I did the global health work as in my general pediatrics training, then I went on to subspecialty in rheumatology. And I really wanted to align my passion for global health with my passion for rheumatology. I wanted to put those things together, but in the medical world, they hadn't really been put together so much. Like if you were doing global health, you were more doing infectious disease, like tropical
Right.
medicine, like malaria, or
Yeah.
emergency medicine or trauma. And I was doing like a chronic disease. And it was just at the time, there wasn't a lot of that work going, but I really felt like it was important to do it because I felt like there were, the disease that I study, lupus, it's an autoimmune disease. It's devastating. It can be life-threatening. It can, it can attack any organ system. You can have blindness. You can have renal failure, and it's more severe in kids, and it's more severe in the U.S. and in Europe and people who are of African ancestry, but there was very little known about kids in Africa. And so I was like, well, maybe we should find out a little bit more. Maybe it'll help us understand it. but there was so little known that people didn't even know if it was a good idea for me to try. You know, I really had to like trust my gut and convince my mentors that this was a worthwhile project. And I remember calling up my collaborator, who's now a dear friend, Chris Scott, and saying like, you know, my mentor here doesn't know if this is a good idea because they were worried there won't be enough patients there because there's just nothing in the literature on this. And he like fell off his chair laughing. He's like, not enough patients. Like I have patients coming out of my ears.
Too
And they're
many.
sick. Yeah. But I don't have the time or the funding to like write papers about them. I'm just here taking care of them. So please come and please write the papers. You know, let's work together to get this done. And, you know, I think, you know, every time I've embarked on one of these collaborations and partnerships, I've just, you know, it's been life-changing to see what my patients go through and to understand their stories. You know, like I had a lupus patient in South Africa who had, she the final straw for her mom was when she had a stroke when she was 10 years old. So she'd been
Oh
sick
my
and
God.
sick and sick. I know, it's crazy. And, you know, she had all these symptoms. And, you know, this isn't just in South Africa, this happens in the United States too. It's like these things that look like infections. And so she had a rash and she got treated for that. And then she had something else and she got like an antibiotic. And then her lips were swelling. So they gave her medicine for allergies. And then she woke up one day and she just was paralyzed on one side of her body. And her mom took her to the local doctor and she said, like, this is like the seventh weird thing. And like, this is really a devastating thing. What is going on with her? And he said, well, we'll never know the reason, but we can get you into PT, physical therapy, to try to help her. And she was just like, I know, because like bad things have happened to her and they're going to keep happening until I
Yeah. What do you
understand what's
mean you'll never
underneath.
know
Yeah.
the reason?
Yeah. And so she had a 6-month-old baby at the time and then her 10-year-old daughter, and she got on a bus with the two of them for 24 hours and went to the main city where the big hospital was and got a diagnosis. And that's just like one of like many, like 50 stories that my patients tell me about like the things that they've gone through. So, you know, they have had incredible journeys and overcome incredible obstacles to and it just made me realize that like there needs to be more education and more awareness and more for patients and for, you know, doctors in lower resource settings. And so I kind of got started on this road of trying to work with collaborators to build capacity for rheumatology in these places. But at the same time, my patients were really sick. And so I started to like scientifically become interested in what was driving that. And, you know, that is where I started to take a deep dive into the genetics underlying lupus. And, you know, genetics is an interesting area because if you talk about disparities, there are incredible disparities in what we know about the genetics of just humans in general. Like in early studies, they were all done in people of European ancestry. And then, you know, things were kind of built with those systems in place where
Yeah.
the thing that we standardize to is a European gene.
That not
And
everybody, that
so
most of the world doesn't fit into.
Exactly. And you know, I'm not the only one who realizes that those things
Mm-hmm.
need to change. There's many people, but you know, the we're still kind of playing catch up. The majority of what we know about genetics is not outside of what's in the European genome. So, you know, that's kind of another area where like we need to understand the genetics, not just in European populations, because, you know, they're not the sickest patients. And, you know, if we understand about it in a diverse population, we understand the whole spectrum of this disease, and our understanding becomes more a more full understanding, a more broad definition. Um,
And did you originally go to Africa because that's where the sickest lupus patients are?
Yeah,
Okay.
that's where the people of that ancestry are the sickest in higher resource settings. There wasn't really a lot known, but that was kind of my motivation that there might be very sick patients there.
Mhm.
And it turned out to be true. They, you know, comparing them to patients in North America, they are very sick. And it's probably a combination of genetic predisposition and access to care issues. And I kind of cover both spheres in the research that I do. But yeah, that was what a big part of what drove me to start my project there.
So you say you learned to follow your intuition, and
Mm-hmm.
obviously, that was acknowledged. But what I'm also hearing from you is that a lot of your success depended on building these collaborations.
Absolutely, for
And that,
sure, for sure.
what that says to me is that you were able to convince and influence others to get on the bandwagon with you.
Yeah, if, in some ways, and in some ways, I think I make a good partner. Like I think when I set up my collaboration in South Africa, what I did first was go in and roll up my sleeves and work side by side with them. And so the patients knew that I was there to really take care of them, and the other doctors knew that I would work side by side with them as a teammate. And then once that trust and that relationship was established, then we could really build something great together. And I think that is really important because, nobody wants somebody to come in to where they're working and say like, hey, you're doing everything wrong and I'm here to fix everything. Like they want to
Mm-hmm.
say like, hey, let's work together and let's move things forward together. And so, that's what we did. And my collaborations that I have, they're amazing relationships. Like these are working relationships that are cultivated over time, and some of my best friends in the world are my collaborators on projects, because you just work so closely together and you kind of get in sync and you have a shared passion to improve the lives of your patients, and it's just an incredibly enriching and fulfilling relationship. And great. And I think all of the things that got me in trouble when I was a kid back in Catholic school are things that helped me as a collaborator. I'm outgoing, and I am not afraid to like cause a little bit of a ruckus. You kind of have
Mm-hmm.
to not be afraid to get in there and mix it up. So
And
yeah.
you refused to play small.
Yep, that's true. I dream big, for sure, for sure.
Yeah. Did you ever, somewhere along this way, have any doubts, any self doubts, any feeling that maybe I'm not going to be able to accomplish everything that I want to?
I think for sure. I have battled incredible imposter syndrome along the way.
Mm.
That inherent bias where
Yeah.
I look around at the leaders in science and medicine, and they don't look like me, and so I have trouble trusting that I'm the person that's gonna advance. Or I have had that problem, but really, um, I think what saves me from my imposter syndrome are two things. One, my work ethic, like I trust in the work that I'll be able to do. And two, my sense of purpose and passion. Like I'm not in this game for advancing my name in the field of science and medicine. I'm in it to improve the lives of my patients. And if I just show up and work with dedication at that, chipping away every day, then I'm winning. And so I think those things really ground me. And when all of like the other swirling thoughts, I go back to those things and it keeps me going. And every day when I have the tough days, I think about one of like those patient stories, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, I can't quit. They can't quit. They don't get to like wake up tomorrow without this.
Mm.
How could I quit? Like I have to keep going.
So it is that passion, it is that drive to make things better,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
to do what you can to the injustice in care and resources available.
Yeah. And then, on my own path, that same thing is what drives me to kind of keep going in terms of a woman as a woman leader. Like if you look at the way things work in science and medicine, like half of medical school classes are women, which is great and like an important change. And I'm so thankful that it is that way. But if you look at the leadership, the further up you get, the slimmer the percentage of women gets. And, you know, there's hard data on the reasons for that. You know, there's a big pay gap, and it's actually in medicine depressingly widening and not narrowing. And you know, the things that are true in women's leadership everywhere, not just in medicine, but you know, the double standard where there's no way to be as a woman leader. You can't be too soft, but you can't be too hard.
Yeah, the
That kind
double
of
bind.
yeah, the double bind. And then, you know, I think mentorship and sponsorship in science and has a lot to do with it. Like, you know, if every leader in science is a male and they're looking at a mentee and they just feel like they're looking in the mirror, it's a version of their younger self, and they'll promote them, they'll sponsor them, they'll put them up for positions. But if it's somebody who's struggling with something that they've never struggled with, they might mentor them out of leadership instead of mentoring them through that tough patch.
And
So
they're
I think
just
it's
more comfortable working with
yeah,
men.
lots of reasons. But you know, that also really compels me to kind of keep like blazing that trail so that other women see themselves in a leader, and you know, things are a little bit easier when they try to walk the path. You know, I'm an incredibly hard worker, and I don't complain about things as I'm going through them, but once I get through them, I certainly give feedback for people coming after me of how it can get better. You know, like, this was
So
really tough.
how are you helping other women in this area
Yeah,
advance?
so in a few ways, I think just by taking on leadership roles and kind of giving them representation, so they are seeing somebody in
Mm-hmm.
that capacity. I've been blessed both in science and medicine to have women mentors, and I think that's been hugely, you know, I feel like when you see that it can be done, you have more faith in yourself as you're trying to do it. And then, you know, mentoring women where I am and outside, just, you know, really trying to be a resource to them, creating a support group at my own um, place of work so that like all the women in my department get together and we just like talk about our struggles and support each other through the tough patches, and you know, sponsor or you know, highlight the work that each other have done. You know, that kind of collaborative team
Mm-hmm.
effort.
So important. I mean, so important. You just can't do this. Um, well, any kind of career in a vacuum. You really need
You
that
can't.
network and support and role modeling, sponsorship. You need all of it.
Right. And just like that sounding board of like, this thing happened to me and I'm not crazy, and I'm, you know, my experience is validated, and, you know, and really, um, you know, I want things to change. Like some of what I do is just because I want my mentees to not have to fight these same battles.
Yeah.
I really want to make it a better place. And I don't subscribe to that mindset of like, I paid my dues, so you should be paying your dues. Like, everybody loses in that scenario.
I
Like, it's
know. But then I've had younger women say to me, you know, as they're entering the corporate arena, well, we thought your generation took care of all this, but all this gender bias is still there, you know?
I
Like,
know.
yeah, I mean, we wanted to, we're still working on it, but it's
Yeah.
some of these biases are just too strong. They're so strong. They're
Yeah, and
prevailing right now.
real change takes time. You know, like performative change or change at the surface, you know, happens quickly, but real sustained cultural change takes time for
Yeah,
sure.
and speaking of culture, I'm just thinking of, you know, the work and experience you have in Africa, where women are really so strong. I mean, that must really influence you as well. I mean, if, you know, you're talking about that mom who took her two kids on that 24-hour bus ride, but women in Africa are really holding it all together, I would think.
Yeah, there's been so many incredibly inspiring women in Africa.
Mhm.
And, you know, when I was in Liberia, Ellen Sirleaf was the president. And so, you know, she was just like, and I had the incredible opportunity to meet her and like really have a conversation with her. And she was just, she led so beautifully. You know, she was listening and thinking and, you know,
Mhm.
carefully paying attention and taking feedback in and making like very strong but very thoughtful decisions that really brought in the welfare of a lot of her country's people. And you know, she's constantly been an inspiration to me, as well as many of just the other women that I've met along the way, for sure. Collaborators, patients, mothers.
Yay. So, what advice do you have for other women who may be playing it small and not going after their dream?
You know, I think that I understand, first of all, why you might be making those decisions, but I would really challenge you to dream bigger. And you know, if you're accomplishing everything that you're dreaming about, your dreams just aren't big enough yet. You know, like aim for
Mm.
it, ask for it, go for it. And really trust your intuition and develop a network of people that you can safely mourn, lick your wounds with. You know, I think
Yeah.
that's incredibly important too, because if you're going to do something innovative, or if you're going to try to change culture, like you're going to fail more than once. You are going to fall down hard. And so there has to be a trusted circle that picks you up and dusts you back off and like tells you you still got it in you to try again. So I
Get
think
back on
both of
track.
those. Yeah, for sure.
Well, that's great advice. And Laura, thank you so much for being on the show today. You truly are an inspiration. How can my listeners find out more about you and the work that you're doing?
Well, there you know, I put out a lot on Twitter.
Okay.
So you can follow me on Twitter. My handle is Laura Lou Mad 11. And or you know, just Google Scholar Me and you can look for some of my work there.
Okay. Yeah.
Those
I
are
mean,
probably the best two places.
we'll put all that in the show notes so that everybody
Yeah.
can follow you and learn more about what the amazing work that you're doing. Laura, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me, Bonnie. It's been a true pleasure.
And thanks for listening to Badass Women at Any Age. Uh, Please check out my website, bonniemarcusleadership.com, for more information about my coaching and speaking services. I'd love to connect with you on social media. And until next time, be bold, be your badass self.